4 years, that's how long he had gone without touching another person. Not because he didn't want to, because he couldn't. He washed his hands over and over, after touching a doorknob, after handling money, even after setting something down on his own table. He didn't sit on public benches. He carried his own utensils when he ate out. Everything in his apartment had a place, and if it shifted even slightly, he fixed it. That was how he kept the world under control. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Then one night, he opened his door and found me asleep in his chair. I had been in his city for 43 days. Long enough to feel the loneliness, not long enough to belong anywhere yet. But there I was, in the one chair no one else had ever used. The one he cleaned before and after every time he sat in it. He stood there watching me, waiting for that familiar panic to rise, the one that always came when something wasn't right. But it didn't. Instead, he walked quietly across the room. He took a blanket from the shelf, and he covered me. Later, when he told me what had happened, he said something I will never forget. He said, for the first time in 10 years, nothing felt wrong. That was the moment everything changed. This isn't just a love story. It's the story of two people who had learned how to live alone, and what happened when, against all odds, that stopped being necessary. But to understand why that moment mattered, you need to know who I was, and you need to know who he was. My name is Tigist Alemu. I was born and raised in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. My mother is a school teacher. My father sold fabrics in a large open market called Mercado. He had a simple way of judging quality. He would take a piece of cloth between his fingers and say, "You don't need to look closely. If it's good, you can feel it." I believed him. I still do. I studied architecture at Addis Ababa University. I liked designing spaces that made people feel welcome, places where different kinds of people could come together and feel at ease. When I was 27, I was given an opportunity to study abroad in Seoul, South Korea. It was my first time leaving home. Everything felt different. The language, the pace, the quiet. Even the way people stood in line. I had never felt so aware of myself, how I looked, how I spoke, where I belonged or didn't. And then, in that unfamiliar city, I met a man who had spent years trying to make his world smaller, safer, and completely under control. A man who had built his life carefully, one rule at a time. A man who had no room for surprises, until somehow he made room for me. I arrived in Seoul on a Tuesday in October. It was my first time in Asia, and everything felt different right away. The streets were bright and busy. The subway was quiet, almost too quiet. People stood in neat lines and waited their turn without speaking. Back home in Addis Ababa, a line is more of a suggestion. Here, it was followed exactly. It was impressive, and a little lonely. The fellowship placed me in an apartment building in a neighborhood called Mapo. I lived on the 4th floor. He lived on the 3rd. For the first couple of weeks, I didn't know him, but I heard him. Late at night, through the floor, I would hear movement, not music, not footsteps, furniture. A chair scraping, then silence, then again, move, stop, like someone trying to get something exactly right. After a while, I stopped thinking about it. Then one day, I stepped into the elevator, and there he was. He was already inside, holding groceries. Everything was carefully wrapped, paper inside plastic, and then another bag around that. He looked at me, not unfriendly, just very still. He took one small step back as if to give me space. I pressed the button for my floor. We stood there in silence. Then I said, without really thinking it through, "Do you live on the 3rd floor? I think I hear you moving furniture at night." He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, very calmly, "The table has to be a certain distance from the wall. It keeps shifting." I said, "Tables don't usually move on their own." He nodded. I know. The elevator stopped on his floor. He stepped out. Then just before the doors closed, he turned his head slightly and said, "It moves in here too." He tapped his temple. And then he was gone. I stood there for a moment after the doors opened on my floor, thinking about a man who woke up in the middle of the night to fix things that weren't really moving. That was how I met Park Junho. That was 43 days before I fell asleep in his chair. We didn't become close right away. We would see each other in passing, small nods in the hallway, nothing more. Then one Saturday I found him in the laundry room. He looked at the machines, then at me. "I can come back," he said. "You don't have to," I told him. "You were here first." He hesitated, then asked, "What fabric softener do you use?" I showed him the bottle. He read the label carefully, like it mattered. Then he nodded and started his load. We stood there for a few minutes in silence. Then he said, without looking at me, "You're from Ethiopia." Not a question. "Yes," I said. "How did you know?" "I looked you up," he said. "After the elevator, I wanted to understand your accent." I laughed before I could stop myself. He looked surprised. Then, just for a second, he almost smiled. I said, "Most people would just ask." He said, "Most people are comfortable not knowing. I'm not." That was when I began to understand him. He didn't talk just to talk. When he said something, he meant it. No guessing. No pretending. Just the truth exactly as he saw it. Over the next few weeks, we spoke more, in the hallway, in the laundry room, sometimes outside near the small garden behind the building. He told me he was a designer, not buildings, systems. The way apps and websites are organized so people can use them without thinking. I told him about my project, a community space meant to bring different kinds of people together. He listened carefully, really listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You design places where people can feel at home." He paused. "But you don't look like you feel that way yourself." I didn't answer, because he was right. I was the only black woman in my fellowship. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because it shaped everything. One afternoon on the subway, an older woman sat across from me and stared at my hair. Not with cruelty, just curiosity, but I felt it. The quiet weight of being noticed not as a person, but as something unusual. That kind of attention is exhausting. Not anger, just a constant awareness that you are never invisible. I carried that feeling home, and somehow Junho understood it without me having to explain. One evening, I reached across the table and touched his hand. He froze. I pulled back, apologizing. "Wait," he said. He looked at his hand for a long moment. Then he said, "Since I was 22, touch has felt like an alarm going off. Even when nothing is wrong, it doesn't stop." He told me his mother had died from an infection no one saw coming. After that, he began trying to control everything he could, every surface, every detail. "I've lived like that for 10 years, he said. Then he looked at me again. "When you touched me just now, nothing happened." The room went quiet. "That has never happened before." That week, I told my mother about him. She listened, then said, "I am not against your happiness, but love that crosses far must be strong." My father asked one question. "Is he good to you?" "Yes," I said. "Then we will learn the rest," he replied. A few weeks later, his sister came to visit. She was warm but careful. "My brother has built a life that protects him," she told me. "If someone enters that life and leaves, it becomes harder for him to rebuild." "I'm not planning to leave," I said. She looked at me. "No one plans to." Not long after, the building manager pulled me aside and warned me not to misunderstand his kindness. When I told Junho, he was quiet. Then he said, "What I don't like is the idea that someone else's fear decides something for me." He looked at me. "I want to understand what this is." Whatever this is, the world around us had its doubts. We were going to have to be stronger than that. I just didn't know how much stronger yet. The room was dim when I opened my eyes. Everything around me was perfectly in place. The books lined up neatly, every surface clean. And Junho, sitting across from me watching, I sat up. "How long have I been here?" 2 hours, he said. I looked at the chair. "Junho, I'm so sorry," he shook his head. "I stood in the doorway when I saw you," he said. "I was waiting for the alarm." He paused. "It didn't come." I had gone to him that night because I had been crying. Not loudly, just quietly, missing home, missing my parents, missing the feeling of being ordinary. With him, I didn't have to explain anything. I sat in his chair, and I fell asleep. Now he stood in front of me. "I need to say this," he said. "Let me finish." I nodded. "My mother died when I was 22, he said. After that, I tried to control everything, every surface, every detail. It was the only way I knew how to feel safe. He looked at me. I've lived like that for 10 years, then more quietly, and you're the only thing that hasn't set it off. He stepped closer. You're not something I need to manage, he said. You make the room feel bigger, like I don't have to stay inside the same walls anymore. I stood up. We were close now. He reached out slow, careful, and took my hand. He held it. And nothing happened. No panic, no alarm, just quiet. Then his phone rang. He answered. I didn't understand the words, but I could see the change in him, more guarded, more careful. When he hung up, he said, My father knows about you. What did he say? I asked. He's worried, Junho said, about what this means for my life. He paused. I told him I haven't been thinking about anything else. We stood there for a moment. Then he said, I've spent 10 years trying to protect myself from things I couldn't see. He looked at me. The only thing I'm afraid of now is choosing a smaller life because of fear. He took a breath. I don't want that anymore. His father came to Seoul in January, Park Junho. 64 years old, retired engineer. He wore his coat buttoned all the way to the collar, exactly like his son, and I thought, the apple does not fall far in any country in any language. He did not speak English. I did not speak Korean. Everything passed through Junho, filtered, slowed, considered, and sometimes that is exactly the right speed for important things. At dinner, he asked what my parents did. I said, my mother teaches school, my father sells fabric in the market. Junho translated. Mr. Park was quiet for a moment. Then he said something, and Junho's voice, translating it, was careful. He says, a man who teaches his hands to know quality without being told. That is a good thing to pass to a child. I looked at Mr. Park. He was already looking at me, not with warmth, not yet. But with something I recognized, the look of a man quietly revising a conclusion he had already written. Before he left that evening, he said something to his son. Junho listened with his whole body still. Later, I asked what it was. Junho said, he said your mother would have had questions. But she also would have watched the way you breathe around this woman, and she always trusted your breathing more than she trusted her questions. I put my hand over my mouth. Junho looked at me. My mother could read people. My father believes she gave it to me, I said. And what do you read, Junho, when you breathe around me? Without hesitating, safety. I read safety. For a man who had been at war with his own nervous system for 10 years, for a man whose entire life had been a desperate, exhausting search for safety, that word was not small. That word was the whole story. My fellowship ended in March. Junho asked me one question. Not will you stay, not what do you want, he asked. What does your work require? I said. I want to design buildings that exist at the intersection of cultures. Spaces that hold more than one story at a time. He said, that work can be done from many places. I said, yes. I work remotely, he said. I can work from many places too. I looked at him. He looked back at me with those still, dark, careful eyes, and that was how we decided, not with a declaration. With a question about work and a quiet agreement about where work could happen. That was Junho, precise to the end. I flew home to Addis in March. He came with me. I want you to be in my parents' doorway for this moment. My father stood there. He held out his hand. Junho took it. And I watched his face for the alarm, for the flinch I knew to look for. It did not come. Junho shook my father's hand and said, in the Amharic phrase I had taught him on the plane, Dana ne, are you well? My father stared at him. Then he laughed the big, full, uncontained laugh of a man who did not see that coming. He said in Amharic, this one practiced. Junho said, 17 times. On the plane, my father looked at me, then back at Junho. He said, a man who counts knows what he has. He does not take it for granted. He pulled Junho inside. And my mother placed Injira in front of him. She looked at him the way mothers look at the people their children have chosen, measuring everything in a single glance that has taken a lifetime to calibrate. He looked at the food. I saw the brief internal negotiation behind his eyes, the inventory, the alarm checking for reasons to sound. Then he looked at my mother, and he said, "Thank you, Mrs. Alemu," and he ate. My mother caught my eye across the table. She said nothing. She did not need to. Some things are communicated only in the language of mothers, which requires no translation, no dictionary, no careful arrangement of words. It simply arrives, like quality, through feeling. Not through looking. I am telling you this story from our apartment in Addis Ababa. Junho is at his desk across the room. His laptop is centered. His coffee cup sits in its place. The small plant I gave him is by the window. I moved that plant once. He moved it back. I haven't touched it since, because I've learned something important. Love at its best is not about changing someone. It's about understanding them, why they are the way they are, and making room for that. Junho still has OCD. It hasn't gone away. There are days when he needs things to be just right before he can rest. Moments when he needs a second before he can take my hand. But we've built something that makes room for both of us. His chair is still by the window. Sometimes I sit in it while he works. He looks up. He sees me there, and the alarm goes quiet, not because I fixed him, but because, somehow, he trusts me. My father used to say you can feel what is real. When I looked at this love from the outside, I saw all the reasons it shouldn't work. But when I stopped looking and paid attention to what I felt I knew, it was real. Love doesn't always arrive the way you expect. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just a blanket, placed over you by someone who has never done that before. And you know it's real, because even the alarm goes silent. For every love the world did not see coming, and could not stop. Thank you for listening to this story. If it meant something to you, there's more like it here. You're always welcome to come back for more.